Olympus was not born peaceful. Before it became the shining throne of Zeus, before the songs turned it into a symbol of order, it stood at the far edge of an older violence. The gods did not simply inherit the universe. They took it. And the story we remember as the Titanomachy, the great war between Titans and Olympians, is often told like a clean victory of light over darkness. But the surviving myths are not that simple. They suggest something colder, a family coup, a cosmic succession crisis, a war where the winners became divine, and the defeated were buried so deeply that even memory had to climb back out. So we begin not with marble halls, not with feasting gods, not with thunder polished into royal authority. We begin with a mountain that looks peaceful only because the battle is already over. And if you listen carefully, Greek myth does not ask us to trust the victors too quickly. It asks us to look beneath them. Because Olympus, in this story, is not merely a home, it is a prize, a symbol, a throne raised over a sealed wound. The Titanomachy survives through fragments, poems, genealogies, and later retellings, not as a fixed historical record, but as a mythic investigation into power itself. Who deserves to rule? What makes rebellion righteous? And when a tyrant is overthrown, how do we know the cycle has truly ended? Before we venture further into the shadows, take a moment to subscribe, so you never miss a secret that history has tried to forget. Tonight, we follow the war before Olympus became sacred, not as a simple tale of heroes and monsters, but as a darker inheritance. Gods born from fear, fathers overthrown by sons, and an ancient order broken so a new one could call itself eternal. The difficult thing about the Titanomachy is that it feels enormous, but it reaches us through a surprisingly narrow doorway. For something so grand, a war among the first divine powers, a struggle that rearranged the universe, we do not possess a full ancient battle chronicle. There is no single Greek text that sits us down and says calmly, "Here is everything that happened, day by day, from the first blow to the last chain lowered into Tartarus." That kind of certainty belongs more to modern fantasy than to ancient myth. What we have instead is a surviving landscape of fragments. The clearest and most influential account comes from Hesiod's Theogony, a poem that tries to organize the birth of the gods, the succession of divine rulers, and the violent logic that carries one generation into the next. Hesiod gives us the backbone. Uranus, Cronus, Zeus, the Titans, the Olympians, the monstrous allies released from imprisonment, and the terrible final defeat that sends the older powers down into the depths. But even Hesiod is not writing like a modern historian. He is not checking dates. He is not comparing military records. He is shaping inherited sacred story into poetry, genealogy, theology, politics, memory, and warning, all braided together. In his hands, the universe does not begin as a peaceful machine. It begins as a family, and that family is already dangerous. That matters, because when people say, "the Titans fought the gods," it sounds simple, almost too simple. One side old, one side new, one side dark, one side bright, one side doomed, one side destined. But Greek myth rarely stays that tidy once you look closely. The Titans were not a race of cartoon villains waiting to be defeated. They were divine ancestors. Some were parents of the gods who would later rule. Some were associated with law, memory, prophecy, or cosmic order. Some do not fit neatly into any battlefield at all, and the sources do not always agree in the ways a clean story would need them to agree. Other poems once existed. Other traditions circulated. Some are lost except for a title, a mention, a summary, or a later writer preserving a scrap because it served another argument. Ancient audiences may have known versions that would surprise us now. Details could change depending on region, cult, poet, and purpose. A god who looks like an enemy in one telling may appear more complicated in another. A weapon, a birthplace, a punishment. Even a motive can shift as the myth passes through different hands. So when we enter this war, we have to enter it carefully, not timidly. Carefully. There is a difference. A timid reading would drain the myth of force, treating every strange detail as an error or every contradiction as a problem to be solved away. But a careful reading lets the strangeness remain. It asks what kind of story ancient Greeks were preserving when they imagined the cosmos as something ruled by succession, fear, imprisonment, revolt, and negotiated order. That is where the Titanomachy becomes more than a mythic action sequence. It becomes a memory of power changing hands. Not memory in the modern sense, as though someone stood on a hillside and watched Zeus throw thunderbolts at Cronus, but memory as culture often uses it. A way of thinking about why the present order exists, why it claims legitimacy, and what violence had to be pushed into the background for that order to appear natural. Every ruling system needs a beginning story. The Olympians had one, and like many beginning stories, it did two things at once. It justified the winners, and it preserved the unease surrounding their victory. That unease is important because the Titanomachy is not remembered as a random divine quarrel. It grows out of a pattern. A father fears his children. A ruler tries to prevent succession. The suppressed generation rises. Violence answers violence. The throne changes hands, but the wound remains open. Seen that way, the fragments are not just damaged pieces of a lost epic. They are clues to a deeper structure. Greek myth is full of beautiful surfaces. Bright gods, polished temples, sea foam, laurel, music, feasts on high peaks. But underneath those surfaces, there is often a severe political imagination. The Greeks knew that families could become kingdoms, and kingdoms could become prisons. They knew inheritance was not always gentle. They knew that legitimacy often depends on who gets to tell the story after the struggle ends. The Titanomachy survives, then, not as one perfect document, but as a reconstruction. We move between poetry and later interpretation, between divine genealogy and symbolic reading, between what the ancient text says clearly, what later traditions add, and what we should leave uncertain. That uncertainty is not a weakness in the story. In a strange way, it is part of its atmosphere. It forces us to watch the war as the ancients themselves often watched the divine world, through smoke, rumor, song, and inherited names. And perhaps that is fitting. A war before the present order of the gods should not feel fully accessible. It belongs to the age before the rules were settled, before Zeus became the measure of justice, before Olympus learned to look inevitable. The fragments do not give us everything, but they give us enough to recognize the shape of the crime, the rebellion, and the throne waiting beyond them. long before Zeus raised his thunderbolt, before Cronus swallowed his children, before Olympus became the center of divine authority. The first great violence of the Greek cosmos began at home, not on a battlefield, not between rival armies, but between a father, a mother, and the children trapped between them. In Hesiod's account, the earliest world is not a clean map of earth, sea, and sky. It is a living genealogy. Gaia, the earth, brings forth Uranus, the sky, and from their union come powerful children, the Titans, the Cyclopes, and the hundred-handed ones. Already the myth is telling us something uncomfortable. The universe is not being built by abstract laws. It is being born through relationships. And relationships, in Greek myth, can turn violent very quickly. Uranus does not simply rule from above. He presses down. The image is almost too symbolic to miss. Sky over earth, father over mother, the next generation unable to emerge into its own space. Hesiod describes Uranus hiding his children away, preventing them from seeing the light. Later readers often imagine this as imprisonment within Gaia herself, a terrible confinement inside the body of the mother who bore them. However the image is understood, the meaning is brutal enough. The first ruler preserves his power by denying the future room to exist. That is the first pattern. Power fears what comes after it, and because it fears what comes after it, it tries to bury it. This is where the Titanomachy truly begins, even though the Titans and Olympians have not yet gone to war. The later conflict is only the largest expression of a sickness already present at creation. The cosmos begins with a ruler who treats his own children not as heirs, but as threats. The throne is not yet on Olympus. It is the whole sky. And the first tyrant is not Cronus, not Zeus, not any of the figures we usually blame first. The first tyrant is Uranus. Gaia's response is not gentle. It is not passive sorrow. She plots. This detail matters because Gaia is often remembered simply as Mother Earth, a phrase so soft it almost erases her danger. In the older mythic imagination, Gaia is not just fertile ground or nurturing soil. She is ancient, intelligent, wounded, and capable of revenge. She suffers under Uranus's domination, but she also becomes the first strategist in the divine succession story. She fashions a sickle and calls upon her children to act. Most shrink back. That small pause in the myth is easy to pass over, but it reveals the emotional temperature of the story. These are not abstract cosmic forces smoothly replacing one another. These are children afraid of their father. Even divine beings hesitate before violence against the one who made them. Rebellion may be necessary, but necessity does not make it simple. Cronus is the one who answers, the youngest, in many accounts. The boldest, or perhaps simply the one most willing to become guilty. He takes the sickle from Gaia and waits. When Uranus comes to Gaia, Cronus strikes. The act is intimate, humiliating, and irreversible. Greek myth does not hide the fact that cosmic order is born through a wound. From that wound, further powers emerge. The blood of Uranus gives rise to new beings in later parts of the mythic genealogy, including forces of vengeance and violence. Even the overthrow of tyranny does not produce a clean world. It releases consequences. This is one of the most unsettling ideas in the succession myth. The first rebellion is justified, perhaps. Uranus has imprisoned his children. Gaia has been forced into a condition of endless suffering. Cronus acts against a ruler who has made creation itself into a prison. And yet, the method of liberation is so violent that it stains the new order before it even begins. Greek myth is rarely interested in innocent revolutions. It knows that a necessary act can still carry a curse. After Uranus is overthrown, he does not simply vanish from meaning. His defeat creates the logic that will haunt every generation after him. The son has proven that the father can be replaced. The hidden child can become the armed rebel. The ruler above can fall. That knowledge cannot be forgotten once it enters the cosmos. And this is where Cronus's tragedy begins before he ever takes the throne. He has saved his siblings from confinement. He has answered Gaia's call. He has broken the first tyranny. Yet by doing so, he has also created the precedent that will terrify him later. He knows, better than anyone, that power is not permanent. He knows that a child can wait in darkness. He knows that the future can sharpen a blade. So when we later see Cronus becoming paranoid, swallowing his own children one by one, it is not random cruelty. It is the fear of Uranus returning in another form. Cronus has learned from the father he destroyed, but he has learned the wrong lesson. He does not learn that imprisoned children become enemies. He learns that children are dangerous and must be contained more completely. That is the dark inheritance at the heart of the Titanomachy. Not good against evil, not youth against age in some clean moral diagram. A pattern of rule passed from one generation to the next. Fear, confinement, revolt, punishment, replacement. Each ruler claims to be preventing chaos. Each ruler creates the conditions for a deeper chaos. The very attempt to freeze the future turns the future into an enemy. Uranus's fall also changes how we should look at the later Olympian victory. When Zeus eventually rises against Cronus, he is not inventing rebellion. He is walking a path cut open before his birth. His story has an ancestor. His thunderbolt has a shadow behind it. The sickle of Cronus, placed in the sun's hand by Gaia. And Gaia herself remains one of the most complicated figures in this chain. She is victim, mother, conspirator, and force of correction. She does not always support the same side in every later conflict. And that inconsistency is not necessarily a flaw. It may reflect something deeper in the myth. Earth does not belong comfortably to any one regime. She gives birth to rulers, rebels, monsters, and saviors alike. She is the ground beneath every throne, and every throne eventually discovers that the ground can move. The first act of cosmic violence, then, is not a prologue we can skip. It is the seed of the entire war. The Titanomachy begins with the memory of children hidden away from the light. It begins with a mother unable to bear the weight of the sky. It begins with a son who becomes free by committing an act that will teach him to fear his own children. Before Olympus, before Othrys, before thunder, before Tartarus opens again, the Greek cosmos learns its first political truth. No ruler who governs by imprisonment should expect loyalty from the imprisoned. And no son who wins a throne by overthrowing his father can ever look at his own children without hearing the old story breathing behind him. Cronus enters the story as a liberator that is easy to forget. By the time most people meet him, he is already the devourer of his children, the dark father of Zeus, the old king who must be overthrown so the Olympian world can begin. He is usually introduced with the crime that defines him later, not the wound that shaped him earlier. But in the beginning, Cronus is not merely a monster waiting for his turn to be punished. He is the son who dared to act when the others would not. He answered Gaia. He struck Uranus. He opened the sealed future of the cosmos. And then, somehow, he became the thing he had destroyed. That transformation is the true horror of Cronus. Not that he was always cruel, but that victory did not free him from the logic of tyranny. It handed him the throne, and the throne taught him to think like his father. After Uranus is overthrown, the universe does not become democratic, gentle, or balanced. There is no council of grateful children building a kinder cosmic order. Cronus takes power. The age that follows is sometimes remembered in later tradition as a golden age, a time before human toil and decay became central to mortal life. But the succession myth gives that brightness a troubling underside. Even if Cronus's rule could be imagined as prosperous from one angle, its foundation remains an act of violence, and its ruler remains haunted by the method of his own rise. This is one of Greek myth's sharper observations about power. A ruler who reaches the throne through rebellion does not simply remember injustice. He remembers vulnerability. Cronus knows that fathers can fall. He knows that children can be hidden. He knows that a prophecy, a rumor, or even the mere existence of heirs can turn the future into a weapon. His father tried to prevent succession by burying his children before they could emerge. Cronus had seen the failure of that strategy from the inside. He understood the danger of leaving a suppressed generation alive and growing. So when the warning comes that he too will be overthrown by one of his children, it does not arrive in an empty mind. It lands exactly where fear already lives. The prophecy is not just information. It is a mirror. Cronus looks into it and sees himself, younger, armed, waiting. That may be why his response becomes so extreme. He does not merely imprison his children as Uranus did. He improves upon the method. It is a terrible kind of political innovation. Uranus concealed his children in darkness. Cronus consumes them. He does not want them hidden somewhere. They might one day be found. He wants them inside himself, absorbed into the ruler, made incapable of forming a separate future. This is where the figure of Cronus becomes larger than a single mythic character. His name would later be associated, through resemblance and interpretation, with time, Chronos. Although Cronus and time are not originally the same being in a simple way, still, the image is too powerful for later imagination to resist. The father who swallows his children becomes the age that consumes everything born within it. Even without forcing that later association backward, the symbolism is already severe. Cronus devours the future to preserve the present. He does not kill his children in a battlefield. He makes succession disappear in the most private way possible. Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon are not allowed to become political beings, not allowed to gather allies, not allowed even to stand before him as threats. They are reduced to what tyrants often want their rivals to become: contained potential, living but powerless. And yet, the myth refuses to let that containment be final. Because Cronus's crime depends on a fantasy all tyrannies share, the fantasy that control can become total. That if every threat is identified early enough, if every heir is watched closely enough, if every dangerous possibility is swallowed before it can speak, then the ruler can escape the pattern of history. But the cosmos of Greek myth is not kind to that fantasy. The very act meant to secure Cronus's reign makes his overthrow more necessary. It turns his household into a prison. It turns Rhea, his wife and sister, into another Gaia, a mother caught beneath the machinery of a frightened ruler. The earlier story begins to repeat, not exactly, but unmistakably. Once again, a divine father tries to prevent the next generation from coming into the light. Once again, a mother becomes the keeper of a dangerous plan. Once again, the future survives through concealment. Cronus has not escaped Uranus. He has recreated him. There is a bleak irony in that. Cronus could have read his own life as a warning against oppressive rule. He could have understood that imprisoned children become the very force that destroys the prison. But fear narrows interpretation. It makes every lesson self-serving. So he reads the past only as a manual for survival. Uranus failed because he did not go far enough. Cronus will go further. This is why the story is not simply about bad fathers and heroic sons. It is about the way trauma can become policy. Cronus's memory of violence does not make him compassionate. It makes him efficient. He governs as someone who believes the universe is a contest between the ruler and the unborn. He has no trust in continuity, only possession. And possession is not the same as order. A stable ruler can imagine a world after himself. Cronus cannot. His reign is trapped in the moment of its own defense. Everything points back to the same fear: the child, the heir, the repetition of the first coup. His throne may be cosmic, but psychologically, it is small. It is a locked room with a king listening for footsteps. That image helps explain why Zeus, when he finally enters the story, is more than another ambitious son. He is the return of everything Cronus tried to deny. He is birth that escaped surveillance. He is prophecy taking flesh. He is the future, refusing to remain inside the body of the past. But before Zeus can stand openly against him, Cronus still rules, and for a time his solution appears to work. His children vanish one by one. The divine household continues under the surface of an unspeakable crime. No rebellion rises. No rival speaks. The father who once freed his siblings now keeps his own offspring in a living darkness. That is the tragedy of Cronus's throne. He wins power by breaking a prison, then preserves power by becoming one. And somewhere beyond his sight, Rhea begins to understand what Gaia understood before her. That when a ruler makes motherhood itself into a battlefield, resistance will not begin with armies. It will begin with a hidden child. Cronus does not attack his children in anger. That is what makes the image more disturbing. He does not lash out in a sudden storm of wounded pride. He does not lose control for one terrible moment and regret it when the room grows quiet. The swallowing of his children is not rage. It is policy. It is a ritual of prevention, repeated with cold consistency each time Rhea gives birth. Hestia first, in the usual ordering. Then Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon. One by one, the children of Cronus and Rhea enter the world, and one by one, their father removes them from it, not by killing them in the ordinary sense. That would make the story simpler, and Greek myth is rarely simple where family is concerned. Cronus swallows them alive. They remain inside him, hidden in the body of the ruler who fears them. It is a grotesque image, but also an exact political metaphor. The future has not been destroyed. It has been absorbed by the present, trapped where it cannot speak, organize, inherit, or even be seen. This is tyranny at its most intimate. Uranus had forced his children back into darkness. Cronus goes further. He makes his own body the prison. He becomes king, jailer, and fortress all at once. And from a distance, the cosmos may have appeared stable. That is another uncomfortable detail. Oppressive orders often look calm from the outside. No war has broken out yet. No thunder has split the sky. No Titan has been dragged into Tartarus. The divine household continues. Cronus sits enthroned. The prophecy has, apparently, been managed. But beneath that appearance of order, an impossible pressure is building. The children are still there. This matters because the myth does not describe a clean disappearance. It describes containment. Cronus tries to freeze succession, but he cannot make birth unreal. Every child he swallows becomes part of the hidden crisis inside him. His solution is also an accumulation of evidence. The more completely he tries to prevent the future, the more of the future he carries within himself. There is a strange irony in that. Cronus fears being replaced by his children, so he brings them as close as possible. He makes them internal. He turns the threat into something he must literally hold. The prophecy he wants to outrun becomes embodied inside his own guarded life. Rhea, meanwhile, is often treated as a supporting figure in this episode, as though her only role is to give birth until Zeus arrives. But the emotional logic of the myth depends on her. She is the one who endures each loss. She is the one who sees the pattern not as a political problem, but as a repeated violation of motherhood itself. Like Gaia before her, Rhea reaches the point where suffering becomes strategy. The first rebellion began because Gaia could no longer bear the confinement of her children. The second begins because Rhea can no longer bear their consumption. In both cases, the mother is not merely grieving. She becomes the guardian of possibility. She understands something the ruling father does not. A child is not only a private bond. In this divine family, a child is a future order of the world. So when Rhea becomes pregnant again, the story tightens. This child is Zeus, and by now, Cronus's system is predictable. That predictability is its weakness. He has turned fear into routine. He expects the same sequence: birth, presentation, swallowing, silence. Tyranny often trusts repetition because repetition feels like control. Rhea uses that expectation against him. According to the familiar version of the myth, she hides the newborn Zeus and gives Cronus a stone wrapped in swaddling clothes. Cronus swallows it. The detail has the sharp simplicity of folklore. The devourer tricked by an object. The king defeated not yet by force, but by substitution. He believes he has consumed the child, who will overthrow him. In truth, he has swallowed a symbol of his own blindness. The stone is almost comic, if the surrounding story were not so dark. A cosmic ruler, terrified of prophecy, is fooled by a wrapped rock, but the humor has teeth. Cronus's failure is not stupidity in the ordinary sense. It is the blindness of power that has stopped seeing individuals. To him, the newborn is not a face, not a cry, not a living being. The child is only a category. Threat. Once Rhea presents something that fits the expected role, Cronus acts automatically. His fear has made him efficient, but not perceptive. This is the first hidden turning point of the Titanomachy. Not the thunderbolt, not the clash between Olympus and Othrys, not the hundred-handed ones hurling stones through the storm. Before all of that, the war turns on a domestic deception. A mother, a hidden infant, and a ruler who mistakes a stone for the future. Zeus survives because someone interrupts the pattern. That may be the deepest meaning of the episode. The cycle from Uranus to Cronus is not broken by strength at first. It is broken by concealment, care, and timing. Rhea cannot defeat Cronus openly, not yet. But she can deny him one repetition. She can create a gap in the machinery of fear, and into that gap, the future escapes. The swallowed children remain trapped, but now they are no longer the whole story. Somewhere beyond Cronus's reach, Zeus is alive. That single fact changes the shape of everything. Cronus believes the prophecy has been neutralized. In reality, it has begun to move outside his control. The myth is careful here in a way we should not miss. Zeus does not rise because he is stronger as an infant. He rises because others protect the possibility of his strength before it exists. Every later symbol of his authority, thunder, kingship, cosmic division, depends first on vulnerability. The ruler of Olympus begins as a child who must be hidden from his father. There is a quiet political lesson in that. Every regime imagines power from the top down. Thrones, weapons, decrees, punishments. But change often begins where the ruler is not looking. In a private room, in a secret decision, in the refusal of one person to cooperate with the expected order of events. Cronus can swallow gods, but he cannot swallow what he does not know has escaped. And so, while the old king sits secure with a stone inside him, and his children imprisoned in the darkness of his body, the real threat is growing elsewhere. Not yet with thunder in his hand, not yet with allies at his side, only breathing, hidden and alive. The future has not defeated Cronus. Not yet, but for the first time, it is outside him. Zeus begins his life not as king of the gods, but as a secret. That is a humbling place to begin, considering what he becomes later. The god who will command storms, judge oaths, divide the cosmos with his brothers, and sit above Olympus first survives by being hidden. Before thunder, there is concealment. Before authority, there is dependency. Before the ruler can speak, others must keep him alive. Later traditions often place his hidden childhood on Crete, in a cave, protected from Cronus, while the old king believes he has swallowed his youngest son. The details vary, and we should be careful here. Myth does not give us a single locked version with one neat geography and one official set of caretakers. Different accounts attach different names, sounds, and local claims to the story. Crete, however, became one of the most enduring settings for imagining Zeus's survival, an island far enough from the center of his father's power to feel like the edge of destiny. The cave matters less as a map point than as an atmosphere. It is the opposite of a throne room. A throne room announces power. A cave hides it. A throne room is public, polished, arranged for recognition. A cave is older than architecture, older than law, closer to the body of the earth. To place Zeus there is to imagine the future ruler of heaven being sheltered in a place that belongs to depth, secrecy, and waiting. And that changes the way we understand him. Zeus is often remembered through his later dominance, and for good reason. In Greek myth, he becomes the central authority of the Olympian order. But the story of his infancy gives him a vulnerability that complicates the image. He is not born into safety. He is born into a family where fatherhood has become lethal, where prophecy is treated as a crime, where a newborn's first political act is simply to remain undiscovered. The infant Zeus does not yet overthrow anything. He endures. That endurance is not passive. In mythic terms, survival itself becomes rebellion. Every breath he takes outside Cronus's body is a violation of the old king's plan. Every day he remains hidden proves that the system is not total. Cronus believes he has enclosed the future, but the future is growing beyond his senses. There is something almost psychological about this part of the story. Cronus rules from fear, but fear has made him strangely narrow. He watches for threats in the form he expects, children presented to him at birth, heirs he can consume, rivals he can place inside his own control. He does not imagine that resistance might take another shape, a substituted stone, a mother's deception, a child raised away from the official world. That is often how rigid power fails. It prepares obsessively for the last danger it understood. Zeus, meanwhile, is shaped by absence. He grows without his swallowed siblings beside him. He grows under the shadow of a father he cannot openly confront. He grows with the knowledge, whether we imagine it as prophecy, destiny, or the logic of the tale itself, that his existence is not private. He is not merely a child being protected from a cruel parent. He is a living challenge to the structure of the cosmos. That is a heavy destiny to place inside a cradle, too. The later stories surrounding Zeus's infancy often add protective noise, attendants clashing weapons, guardians drowning out the cries of the child so Cronus cannot hear him. Whether we treat these as local traditions, later embellishments, or symbolic details, they preserve a meaningful idea. The survival of Zeus requires a conspiracy of sound. The world must cover for him. Nature, servants, nurses, warriors, or spirits, depending on the telling, become part of a hidden network keeping the future alive. It is a rare moment in the myth where power does not look like domination. It looks like protection. Not gentle protection, exactly. This is still Greek myth. The atmosphere is tense, guarded, and dangerous. But the contrast with Cronus is striking. Cronus protects his rule by swallowing. Rhea protects her child by hiding. One form of protection destroys relationship. The other preserves possibility. And somewhere in that contrast, the moral balance of the succession story begins to shift. Zeus will not always be an easy figure. Later myths about him are full of contradictions, abuses of power, acts of justice, acts of appetite, moments of wisdom, and moments that make any simple praise impossible. But in the Titanomachy cycle, his claim begins with a fact that is difficult to ignore. He is the child who should have been consumed and was not. His very life exposes the violence of Cronus's rule. This does not make Zeus automatically innocent. It makes him necessary. That distinction matters. Greek myth is not offering us a spotless liberator. It is offering us a force capable of breaking a closed system. Zeus is not good because he is young, and Cronus is not evil simply because he is old. The real question is whether the cosmos can continue under a ruler who treats birth itself as treason. The hidden childhood answers no. The cave becomes a waiting chamber for regime change. Outside it, Cronus still appears secure. He has no reason yet to believe his pattern has failed. Inside it, the pattern has already broken. The future has a body. It is being fed. It is learning. It is gathering time. There is a quiet irony in the setting. Cronus, whose name later invites association with time, is defeated first not by force, but by delay. Every moment Zeus remains hidden is time working against the old king. The father who tried to consume succession now depends on ignorance lasting forever. But ignorance is a fragile foundation for a throne. Eventually, the child in the cave cannot remain a child. Myths often move quickly over growth, as though destiny ripens between one line and the next. But we should pause over what this hidden upbringing means. Zeus is raised not inside the established order, but outside it. He does not inherit legitimacy through Cronus's approval. He must build it against Cronus's fear. His authority will come from rescue, alliance, force, and victory, not from peaceful succession. That makes the coming war almost inevitable. A secret heir cannot remain secret forever. A swallowed generation cannot remain silent forever. A ruler who has built his safety on the disappearance of his children cannot survive the moment one of those children returns with a memory longer than fear. So Zeus waits in the cave, and the cave holds more than a child. It holds the interruption of a cycle. It holds the first breath of a storm that has not yet learned its own name. The return of Zeus begins with a reversal so strange that it almost sounds like a joke told by a very ancient world. Cronus swallowed his children to prevent rebellion. So rebellion begins when he is forced to give them back. In the familiar shape of the myth, Zeus returns from hiding and somehow compels Cronus to disgorge the children he had consumed. Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon. The exact mechanism varies across traditions. Some versions involve a potion or drug given to Cronus. Others compress the event into the broader logic of Zeus's rise. The evidence is not as smooth as a modern screenplay would want it to be. But the meaning of the scene remains powerful across the variations. Cronus's body, the prison of the future, fails. The children he tried to erase come out alive. That survival is crucial. If Cronus had killed them, the story would become a tale of replacement. One hidden child defeats the old king alone. But because the swallowed gods return, the myth becomes something more political. Zeus does not simply avenge his siblings. He liberates them. The private crime inside Cronus's household becomes the foundation for a public rebellion. It is one of the great reversals in Greek myth. What had been hidden inside the ruler now stands outside him as opposition. Imagine the scene not as spectacle first, but as revelation. For years, perhaps for a mythic span beyond ordinary counting, Cronus's crime has been invisible. The swallowed children are not bodies on a battlefield. They are not prisoners in a fortress that anyone can point to. They are contained inside the one figure who defines the law. His rule depends on the fact that no one can see what he has done. Then the hidden evidence emerges. One by one, the lost children return to the world. The daughters and sons of Rhea are no longer a secret wound. They are witnesses. They are claimants. They are powers with names, domains, and futures of their own. This is where the family curse changes form. Until now, the succession pattern has been intimate. Uranus against his children, Cronus against his father, Cronus against his own offspring. But once Zeus frees his siblings, the conflict can no longer be contained inside the household. It becomes a war between generations. The children of Cronus are not isolated victims anymore. They are a coalition. That word may feel modern, but the idea is useful. Zeus needs allies. He needs legitimacy. He needs more than survival. A hidden heir can fulfill a prophecy, but a new order requires supporters. By restoring his siblings to the world, Zeus becomes not only the escaped child, but the organizer of a divine alternative. His rebellion gains a body larger than himself. And each sibling matters because each carries a different piece of the cosmos that Cronus tried to prevent. Hestia, associated with the hearth, suggests the center of domestic and civic stability. Demeter points toward grain, fertility, and the terrifying dependence of life on seasonal return. Hera will become queenly, political, and often fiercely protective of status. Hades belongs to the unseen realm beneath mortal life, Poseidon to the sea and earthquake, the unstable force below and around the land. These later associations should not be forced too mechanically into the moment of their release, but they help us feel what Cronus had trapped inside himself. Not just children, worlds. The future Olympian order had been swallowed in pieces. When those pieces return, the shape of that order becomes imaginable for the first time. Cronus had tried to preserve a universe ruled by one fearful center, but what comes out of him is plurality. Different powers, different temperaments, different regions of existence demanding recognition. That is part of why the story is bigger than a father being defeated. It imagines the cosmos itself becoming less claustrophobic. Under Cronus, everything dangerous is pulled inward, controlled by the king's body. After the release, power begins to distribute, not peacefully yet, not justly yet. But the first movement is outward. Still, we should resist turning this into a simple liberation poster. Zeus's return is morally charged, but it is not gentle. He is not persuading Cronus through reasoned debate. This is divine force, divine trickery, or both. The same mythic world that condemns Cronus's violence also allows Zeus to use deception against him. Greek stories often accept cunning as a legitimate weapon when direct power is impossible, or when an old injustice must be undone. There is a pattern here too. Gaia used a hidden sickle. Rhea used a hidden child and a disguised stone. Zeus now uses some form of hidden strategy to bring the swallowed gods back. In this family, truth rarely defeats tyranny by announcing itself politely. It must be smuggled, wrapped, sharpened, mixed, concealed. Open justice comes late. The first victories belong to those who understand the blind spots of power. For Cronus, the disgorging is more than a physical humiliation. It is the collapse of his entire theory of rule. He believed that to possess the future was to control it, but possession was never the same as loyalty, and containment was never the same as peace. The children inside him did not become part of him. They remained themselves. The swallowed future did not dissolve. It waited. That may be the most haunting part of the image. Nothing Cronus feared had actually gone away. He had only carried it. When the gods return, they do not return as infants newly born into innocence. Myth does not dwell on their psychology. but the symbolic implication is heavy. These are divine beings whose first experience of their father was consumption. Their rebellion is not abstract ambition. It is rooted in the memory of being denied existence by the one who should have protected them. The war that follows, then, is not a misunderstanding between old and young gods. It is the consequence of a system that made succession impossible without violence. Cronus created enemies because he refused to have children. Not biologically. He had children. But politically, emotionally, cosmically, he refused to let them be children. Refused to allow them to grow into heirs, rivals, successors, or independent powers. He treated their birth as an attack. Eventually, they accepted the role he had assigned to them. They became dangerous. This is one of the sharper ironies of the Titanomachy. The prophecy does not merely predict Cronus's fall. His attempt to avoid it helps produce it. If he had not swallowed his children, Zeus might still have challenged him. Greek myth loves succession too much to make that impossible, but the moral force of Zeus's rebellion comes from Cronus's own cruelty. He gives the next generation its argument, and now that argument has faces. Rhea's grief has become a political fact. Zeus's survival has become a rallying point. The swallowed gods have returned from the impossible interior of tyranny. The family secret has become a cosmic crisis. From this point forward, there is no easy restoration. Cronus cannot pretend nothing has happened. Zeus cannot disappear back into the cave. The liberated siblings cannot return to silence. The old order and the emerging one now occupy the same universe, and there is not enough room for both to rule. The Titanomachy, in its full sense, begins here, not with the first blow between armies, but with the moment when private violence becomes public memory. A ruler vomits up the future, and the future, once released, begins to organize itself for war. Once Zeus and his siblings stand outside Cronus, the story needs a geography. Not because gods require mountains in the way mortals do. Divine power in Greek myth is rarely limited so neatly. A god can belong to a place and still move beyond it. A mountain can be a seat, a symbol, a memory, or a claim. But war becomes easier to imagine when it has heights facing heights. On one side, Olympus. On the other, Othrys. Later summaries often present the Titanomachy as a war between the younger gods on Mount Olympus and the older titans on Mount Othrys. The image is clean, almost architectural. Two divine camps rising above the world, two generations staring across distance, the future and the past given visible form. We should treat the neatness with some caution, because mythic geography can become more fixed in retelling than it was in earlier poetry. Still, the contrast endured because it gives the conflict a shape the mind can hold. Olympus becomes more than a mountain. It becomes the promise of a new center. Before Zeus's victory, Olympus is not yet the unquestioned palace of divine order. It is a claim being made before it has been proven. To imagine the young gods there is to imagine them gathering around a future that does not yet have legal status. They are not the established regime. They are rebels, survivors, escaped children, and allies preparing to turn grievance into rule. That is easy to forget because we know how the story ends. We look at Zeus and already see the king. We look at Hera and already see the queen. We look at Poseidon and Hades and already see the cosmic division waiting for them. But inside the war, none of that is guaranteed. Olympus is not yet inevitable. It is a risk. Othrys, by contrast, represents the old height. The Titans are older powers, but not necessarily primitive powers. That distinction matters. Older does not mean stupid, chaotic, or morally empty. Ancient myth does not always treat age as wisdom, but it does treat age as weight. The Titans belong to an earlier layer of the divine family. Their existence reaches back before the Olympian order, before the world has been organized into the pattern later audiences recognize. And yet, by the time war comes, age has become defensive. The older generation is no longer simply ancestral. It is embattled. Cronus's rule has made succession impossible, and the Titans who stand with him become defenders of a throne built on suppression. Their mountain, then, is not only a military camp. It is a refusal, a high place from which the past insists it will not be replaced. This is why the conflict cannot be reduced to a family argument with scenery. Olympus and Othrys are two answers to the same question. Who gets to define reality? That may sound abstract, but in myth it is concrete. Whoever wins will determine what counts as order. The winners will decide punishments, domains, marriages, honors, and the structure of divine authority. They will explain why some powers sit in brightness while others are locked below. They will become the official architecture of the cosmos. A mountain, in this context, is a political statement. To stand on Olympus is to say, the future has a summit. To stand on Othrys is to say, the past still has walls, but the line between the two sides is not as pure as the image suggests. This is not a war in which every Titan neatly marches under Cronus, and every future Olympian is morally unified under Zeus from the beginning. Greek divine genealogy is too tangled for that. The Titans are relatives of the Olympians. Some are parents, aunts, uncles, grandparents, in-laws, or future allies by marriage and prophecy. The battlefield is also a family tree turned against itself. That makes the war stranger than a simple clash of species. When modern retellings say Titans versus gods, they can accidentally imply that Titans are not gods at all, as though they are a separate category of monster. But in the Greek mythic imagination, the Titans are divine beings. The Olympians are also divine beings. The conflict is not between gods and non-gods. It is between divine generations, divine claims, and divine styles of rule. This changes the moral texture. If the Titans were merely monsters, Zeus's victory would be straightforward. But if they are ancestral gods, then their defeat is also an act of burial. The new order must imprison parts of its own origin. Olympus rises not by destroying an alien force, but by overpowering the family from which it came. That is why the story carries a quiet unease, even when it celebrates Zeus. The young gods have justice on their side in one sense. Cronus's crimes are clear enough. The swallowed children have every reason to rebel, but the war that follows will not simply punish one guilty father. It will overturn a whole generation. It will transform the divine landscape. It will decide which powers may remain visible and which must be hidden away beneath creation. Myths often make political change look cosmic, because to the people telling them, politics and cosmos are not entirely separate. A king is never just a manager. A ruler is the point where law, inheritance, violence, and sacred order meet. So when Zeus contests Cronus, he is not only fighting for personal survival, he is fighting over the right to make the universe legible, and legibility is one of the great privileges of victory. After the war, the Olympian arrangement will feel natural, because the myths we inherit mostly speak from that side of the victory. Zeus will become the center from which order is described. The Titans will become the defeated old powers, remembered through punishment, genealogy, and occasional exception. But during the war itself, the outcome is unsettled. That uncertainty should remain alive in the telling. The young gods may have escaped. They may have gathered. They may have prophecy, grievance, and hidden support. But Cronus is not a minor obstacle. The Titans are not frail relics waiting to be cleared away. They are the older ruling powers of the cosmos. They have height, lineage, and the inertia of established authority. In human terms, that inertia is often stronger than justice. A cruel order can last a long time simply because it is already in place. This is where the geography does its real work. Olympus and Othrys stand apart not just as mountains, but as opposing kinds of time. Olympus is becoming. Othrys is remaining. Olympus gathers those who were denied a future. Othrys shelters those who fear what the future will demand from them. Between them stretches the space where myth turns family trauma into world war. And for all the later brightness of Olympus, we should imagine this earlier mountain without its calm. No settled feasts, no secure hierarchy, no divine music softening the air, only the uneasy formation of a rebellion that has not yet learned whether it will become order or be crushed as another failed revolt. The war is no longer hidden inside Cronus. It now has horizons. The swallowed children have returned. The old powers have drawn their line, and the cosmos itself seems to pause between two heights, waiting to discover which mountain will become memory and which will become law. The war does not end quickly. That detail is easy to lose when the Titanomachy is retold as a sequence of famous moments. Zeus escapes, the gods are freed, weapons are forged, thunder falls, the Titans are defeated. In summary, it can feel almost swift, as if the old order collapses the moment the rightful successor appears. But Hesiod's version gives the conflict a weight that summary tends to flatten. For 10 years, the war remains unresolved. 10 years, in myth, is not just a number on a calendar. It is a way of making time feel heavy. The Greeks used long spans to give suffering a shape. 10 years at Troy, 10 years of wandering, 10 years of divine conflict before the cosmos can be settled. Whether we treat the number literally or as a poetic measure of endurance, its function is clear. This was not an easy victory. The Olympians did not simply rise, declare justice, and receive the universe. They were trapped. For 10 years, the younger gods and the Titans struggle without a decisive outcome. The conflict becomes a grinding condition, not a single dramatic event. The old generation cannot be dislodged. The new generation cannot be erased. The cosmos is caught between succession and refusal. That may be the most unsettling image in the whole war. Even gods can become stuck. We often imagine divine beings as powers beyond frustration, beyond exhaustion, beyond the dull horror of repetition. But the Titanomachy, as Hesiod frames it, suggests a universe stalled by conflict. Forces vast enough to shake creation still cannot bring the struggle to an end. Strength meets strength. Claim meets claim. The future has escaped Cronus, but escape is not the same as victory. This is a useful correction to the way myths are sometimes consumed now. Modern retellings often rush toward the spectacular. Thunderbolts, monsters, mountains hurled like weapons. Those images matter, and Hesiod gives us plenty of cosmic violence later. But before the storm breaks, the story insists on stalemate. The central drama is not only who is stronger, it is who can find the missing condition that makes victory possible. Zeus, at this point, is not yet the settled king. He is a commander in a war that refuses to resolve. He has siblings beside him. He has the moral force of Cronus's crimes behind him. He has the energy of the rising generation. Yet none of that is enough. That is an important detail because it keeps Zeus from becoming a simple hero of destiny. Prophecy may point toward his victory, but prophecy does not do the work for him. The world does not rearrange itself merely because Zeus exists. He must discover the buried resources that earlier rulers suppressed. The war's deadlock forces him to look downward, not upward, toward some brighter confirmation of his right to rule, not outward, toward a clean alliance already waiting in the open, downward, into the depths, toward beings who have been hidden beneath creation since the reign of Uranus. Here the Titanomachy folds back into its own beginning. The first crime of Uranus was imprisonment. He buried or concealed children whose power disturbed him. Cronus overthrew Uranus, but did not fully heal the structure of that earlier violence. Some of those ancient prisoners, the Cyclopes and the hundred-handed ones, remain locked away until Zeus recognizes what their release could mean. This is where the war becomes morally and strategically more interesting. Zeus wins not simply because he is younger. He wins because he is willing, at least in this decisive moment, to undo an old imprisonment that the previous regimes had left in place. The stalemate reveals the limits of ordinary succession. One generation replacing another is not enough if it leaves the buried foundations unchanged. Cronus overthrew Uranus, yet the world remained shaped by fear and confinement. Zeus, if he is to become something more than another sun with better timing, must do what Cronus did not. He must reach into the oldest wound of the cosmos and bring the forgotten powers out. There is a sharp political insight hidden here. Every new order claims to break from the old one, but often it inherits prisons it prefers not to notice. It benefits from silences already built into the world. It calls itself new while leaving certain doors locked, because opening them would be dangerous, inconvenient, or too revealing. The 10-year stalemate forces the question: can Zeus defeat Cronus while keeping the old architecture of imprisonment intact? The answer appears to be no. The war will not move until what has been buried is acknowledged. That gives the stalemate a narrative purpose beyond delay. It strips away the illusion that rebellion automatically produces transformation. The Olympians can oppose the Titans for year after mythic year and still fail to create a new order. Their cause may be justified, but justification does not equal capacity. They need a different relationship to the powers under the world. And those powers are not gentle ornaments waiting to be rescued. The beings beneath creation are terrifying. The Cyclopes and the hundred-handed ones belong to the raw, excessive imagination of early myth. They are not polite allies. They are vast, strange, overwhelming figures whom earlier rulers feared enough to imprison. To release them is not a tidy moral gesture. It is a risk. Zeus must bring into the war forces that the old order classified as intolerable. That risk is what makes the decision meaningful. A ruler who frees only safe prisoners has not truly challenged the logic of imprisonment. Zeus turns the war because he releases powers capable of changing the balance of reality itself. In doing so, he also binds them into his emerging order. Their liberation is not separate from his strategy. It is both an act of justice and an act of war. The myth does not let us choose only one. That ambiguity is worth preserving. Zeus's decision can be read as wiser and more generous than the choices of Uranus and Cronus. It can also be read as politically brilliant. He recognizes that the defeated and buried may become decisive allies if given honor, food, and freedom. The new regime will be built partly through gratitude, but also through calculation. Greek myth understands that power and justice often travel together without becoming the same thing. For 10 years, then, the cosmos waits in a state of unresolved violence. The mountains stand opposed. The old gods do not yield. The young gods do not retreat. No side can turn force into finality. And then Zeus looks beneath the battlefield. That movement downward changes the scale of the war. Until now, it has been a conflict between generations visible in the divine world. But the solution lies with beings older than the current quarrel, beings whose imprisonment reaches back to the first tyranny of the sky. The Titanomachy can only end when the war remembers where its pattern began. This is what the Stalemate teaches. A crisis caused by buried violence cannot be solved only on the surface. For 10 years, Olympus and Othrys contend above the world. But the key to victory is not on either mountain. It is beneath them, in the dark places where the first rulers hid what they could not bear to face. The war turns when Zeus stops looking only at his enemies. That may sound small, but in the logic of the Titanomachy, it is decisive. For 10 years, the conflict has been imagined as a clash between two visible powers. The younger gods gathered against the older titans, Olympus against Othrys, the future against the past. But the balance cannot be broken by staring harder across the battlefield. The missing force is not in front of Zeus, it is below him. Beneath the ordered surface of the world, beneath the mountains and the sky-wide violence of the war, there are prisoners whose suffering began before Zeus was born. The Cyclopes and the hundred-handed ones belong to the earlier generation of children born from Gaia and Uranus, beings too strange, too powerful, or too threatening for the first ruler of the cosmos to tolerate. Uranus imprisoned them. Cronus overthrew Uranus, but the old wound remained. That detail is damning. Cronus had been the rebel once. He had known what it meant for a father to bury his children. He had felt the pressure of confinement in the first age of the world. And yet, after taking power, he did not become the liberator of every prisoner his father had made. He became selective. He freed enough of the future to crown himself, but not enough to transform the order he inherited. This is where Cronus's revolution reveals its limits. He broke the tyrant. He did not break the prison. Zeus's decision to release the Cyclopes and the hundred-handed ones therefore becomes more than a useful military maneuver. It is a direct confrontation with the oldest pattern in the myth. Rulers bury what frightens them. Uranus buried his children. Cronus swallowed his. The old order survives by pushing dangerous life into darkness and then calling the surface peaceful. Zeus, at this moment, does something different. He opens the depth. We should be careful not to make this too clean. Zeus is not acting as a modern humanitarian reformer. He is trying to win a war. He needs power, and the imprisoned beings can give it to him. The myth does not ask us to pretend strategy is absent. In fact, the story becomes more interesting because strategy and liberation are intertwined. Zeus frees them because it is right, perhaps. He frees them because it is useful, certainly. And in Greek myth, those motives often stand uncomfortably close together. The Cyclopes are especially important because they are connected with the weapons that will define Olympian authority. They give Zeus thunder and lightning, the force that becomes almost inseparable from his identity. The later imagination also associates divine weapons with Poseidon and Hades, the trident, the helmet of darkness, though details vary by source and tradition. However we arrange those variations, the symbolic point is clear. The new order receives its instruments of rule from beings the old order had buried. That is a remarkable idea. The symbols of sovereignty do not come from a palace. They come from a prison. Zeus's thunderbolt is not merely a weapon in this reading. It is the return of suppressed power in disciplined form. What Uranus and Cronus feared as monstrous excess becomes, under Zeus, the technology of kingship. The dangerous beings below the world are not erased. They are incorporated. Their force is given direction. This helps explain why the release is both moral and unsettling. A prison opens, but the released powers immediately become part of a war machine. Freedom enters the story as alliance. Gratitude becomes political. The Cyclopes and hundred-handed ones are honored, fed, and brought into Zeus's cause. At the same time, their liberation helps produce a new regime that will soon create prisons of its own. Greek myth rarely lets victory remain morally untouched for long. Hundred-handed ones shift the war's physical scale. Their very bodies are images of overwhelming capacity. Many hands, immense strength, a kind of abundance that ordinary divine combat cannot match. Earlier rulers feared them because they were excessive, difficult to classify, impossible to fit into a neat hierarchy. In war, that excess becomes the advantage Zeus needs. This is one of the Titanomachy's sharpest reversals. The old order treated the unmanageable as a threat to stability. The new order wins by making the unmanageable its ally. There is a lesson there about power, but not a comforting one. Sometimes the forces that build a new order are precisely the forces the previous order called dangerous. The question is not whether they were dangerous. They were. The question is dangerous to whom and why. To Uranus, they were dangerous because they disrupted his domination. To Cronus, they were dangerous because freeing them might have exposed the incompleteness of his own rebellion. To Zeus, they are dangerous too, but also necessary. Necessity changes how power interprets danger. The release of the prisoners beneath creation also changes Zeus himself. Until this point, he has been the hidden child, the returned son, the organizer of his siblings. Now he becomes something larger, the god who can gather the discarded forces of the cosmos and turn them toward a new architecture of rule. This is the beginning of Zeus as political intelligence, not just divine muscle. He understands what Cronus failed to understand. A ruler cannot secure the future only by suppressing what he fears. At some point, the buried will decide the surface. Still, the old pattern is not fully broken. That is the tension the myth leaves us with. Zeus frees some prisoners, but after victory, the defeated Titans will be imprisoned in Tartarus. The new order is born by opening one depth and sealing another. It wins through liberation, then preserves itself through confinement. That is not a contradiction to smooth away. It is the story's central discomfort. The Titanomachy is not the arrival of a world without prisons. It is the transfer of authority over who gets imprisoned, who gets released, and what those decisions will be called. Under Uranus, imprisonment is tyranny. Under Zeus, imprisonment will be punishment, justice, cosmic necessity, perhaps all at once, depending on whose story is being told. The prisoners beneath creation force us to ask whether Zeus is breaking the cycle or learning to govern it. For now, though, the immediate effect is undeniable. The stalemate ends. The Olympians gain what they lacked: weapons, strength, and the support of beings whose power reaches back to the first trauma of the world. The war is no longer balanced. The old rulers are about to face not only the children they tried to suppress, but the earlier children they never bothered to free. The battlefield is widening through time. Cronus is no longer fighting only Zeus. He is fighting the unfinished consequences of Uranus's cruelty, the failure of his own revolution, the swallowed future now standing outside him, and the buried powers rising from below. That is why this moment feels like the true hinge of the war. The Titanomachy does not turn because Zeus finds a sharper weapon in some neutral armory. It turns because he enters the hidden basement of the cosmos and changes the status of those left there. He takes the oldest prison in the story and makes it the source of his victory. Above, the mountains still wait. Olympus has not yet become the home of the gods. Othrys has not yet become the memory of a losing side. But beneath them, something ancient has shifted. Doors that were meant to remain closed have opened. Hands that were bound are now ready to throw mountains. Thunder, not yet fully royal, is entering the world. And Cronus, who once survived by keeping the future inside him, is about to learn what happens when the past he ignored comes up from the dark. The new order begins, strangely enough, as a gift from the imprisoned. Before Zeus can become the god we recognize, before the thunderbolt becomes his signature, before Olympus becomes a seat of command, he needs something more than courage, lineage, and grievance. He needs instruments, not just weapons in the ordinary sense, but symbols powerful enough to announce that the cosmos itself is about to be governed differently. The Cyclopes provide that turning point. In the most familiar tradition, they give Zeus thunder, lightning, and the thunderbolt. These are not small additions to his story. They become the sound and shape of his authority. Zeus does not merely hold power, he makes it audible. When thunder rolls, the sky itself seems to speak in his name. That is a profound transformation. Cronus ruled by swallowing. His power was inward, secretive, enclosed. It made things disappear. Zeus's power, by contrast, becomes outward and unmistakable. Lightning does not hide. Thunder does not negotiate. The storm crosses distance, breaks darkness, and forces recognition. The weapon suits the political difference between them. Cronus's tyranny is silent containment. Zeus's kingship announces itself across the heavens. But this does not mean Zeus's power is gentle. A thunderbolt is not a constitution. It is violence refined into divine authority. That is one of the contradictions at the heart of the Olympian order. Zeus's claim may begin with liberation, but his rule is marked from the start by overwhelming force. The old world will not be persuaded into retirement. It must be broken. The thunderbolt is therefore both a sign of justice against Cronus and a warning about the regime that will follow. The new king will not swallow his rivals in secret, perhaps, but he will strike from above. Later traditions and summaries often place other great divine weapons in this same atmosphere of cosmic arming. Poseidon's trident, Hades' helmet, or cap of darkness, sometimes described as a gift connected to the same cycle of divine craftsmanship. The details vary depending on the source, and we should not pretend that every version lines up neatly. Still, as a symbolic cluster, these objects are revealing. They seem to anticipate the later division of the cosmos: sky and storm for Zeus, sea and earthquake for Poseidon, darkness and the unseen for Hades. The war is not only producing victory, it is producing administration. That is easy to miss because weapons usually make us think of battle first. Who strikes? Who falls? Who has the stronger arm? But in myth, a weapon can also be a title in physical form. The thunderbolt is Zeus's right to command the sky. The trident suggests Poseidon's mastery over unstable waters and shaking earth. The helmet of darkness, where it appears, belongs to a god whose realm will be felt precisely because it is unseen. Each object describes a mode of rule. Zeus rules by visibility and command. Poseidon rules by pressure, depth, and sudden upheaval. Hades rules from concealment, not absence, but hidden presence. In that sense, the gifts from the Cyclopes are not merely tools for defeating the Titans. They are the first outlines of a divided universe. The swallowed children of Cronus are no longer only survivors. They are becoming office holders of reality. This is where the Titanomachy begins to shift from rebellion into statecraft. A rebellion can be fueled by injury. A state requires distribution. Someone must govern the sky. Someone must govern the sea. Someone must govern the dead. The myth does not present this as bureaucracy, of course. It presents it as divine destiny, sacred force, and objects charged with meaning. But beneath the poetry is a recognizable political problem. After the tyrant falls, who gets which power? That question can be more dangerous than the war itself, because victory unites enemies of the old order only temporarily. Once the old order weakens, the winners must decide how not to become enemies of one another. The weapons matter because they distinguish powers before the final settlement. They give each major god a sphere, a style, a claim. The coming Olympian hierarchy is being forged before it is formally declared, and the forge is morally complicated. The Cyclopes, once buried by earlier rulers, become the makers of kingship. Their craft allows Zeus to defeat the Titans. Yet their role also reminds us that the new regime depends on those it did not create. Zeus's authority is not self-born. It is assembled from alliances, rescues, exchanges, and older powers brought into a new arrangement. That makes the Olympian victory less simple, but more interesting. Power rarely arrives pure. It is borrowed, negotiated, inherited, seized, gifted, and justified after the fact. Zeus may become king, but he becomes king with thunder made by others. His sovereignty carries the memory of the prison from which that thunder came. There is something almost unsettling in that. Every time Zeus raises the bolt, the myth quietly remembers the Cyclopes. Every flash of royal force is also a trace of beings once considered too dangerous to remain free. The weapon does not erase its origin. It carries it. This is why the arming of the gods should not be rushed past as a convenient upgrade before the final battle. It is a philosophical moment disguised as equipment. The old order hid excessive power in the depths. The new order extracts it, shapes it, and calls it legitimacy. That is not the same thing as innocence, but it is effective. The thunderbolt also changes the emotional weather of the story. Until now, Zeus has often moved through secrecy, hidden birth, concealed childhood, strategic return, liberation through cunning. With thunder, he becomes public. The secret child of the cave steps into the open as a god whose presence can no longer be mistaken or swallowed or denied. Cronus once failed to recognize a stone wrapped as a child. He will not fail to recognize this. The storm is recognition made violent. Still, the weapons do not make the war over by themselves. A symbol must be tested. A claim must be enforced. The Titans still stand. Othrys has not fallen. The old powers have not yet been chained. But something essential has changed in the balance of meaning. Zeus no longer appears only as the survivor of Cronus's crime. He now appears as the carrier of a new cosmic technology, armed by those the old rulers feared, surrounded by siblings whose own domains are beginning to take shape. The universe is preparing to be divided, and division, in myth, can be a form of order. Not peace, not yet, but order. The sky will not remain a blank, oppressive weight like Uranus. The sea will not remain an unassigned terror. The underworld will not remain merely a dark below. The cosmos is about to become legible through rulers, boundaries, and responsibilities. That may be why the divine weapons feel so important. They do not only defeat enemies, they draw lines. But every line has a cost. To draw a cosmos is to decide what belongs above, what belongs below, what is honored, what is feared, and what must never return. The same thunder that liberates the Olympians will soon help seal the Titans away. The same order that ends Cronus's devouring will produce new punishments, new hierarchies, new silences beneath the bright summit. So when Zeus receives the thunderbolt, we should hear more than the first note of triumph. We should hear the sound of rule being invented, not in a council chamber, not in a peaceful inheritance, but in the charged air between prison and battlefield, where freed makers arm a hidden sun and the sky prepares to belong to someone new. The name Titanomachy can mislead us. It sounds like a clean war of categories. Titans on one side, Olympians on the other, older gods against younger gods, the past against the future. The word itself invites a simple map, but Greek myth does not behave like a modern team sport, and divine genealogy is not a set of uniforms. The Titans did not all stand together in one uncomplicated block. That is where the story becomes more interesting and more believable as a myth about power. Because in any succession crisis, loyalty is rarely pure. Families divide. Old alliances fracture. Some figures fight openly. Some step aside. Some change position because prophecy, survival, justice, or advantage points them in a different direction. The Titanomachy is remembered as a cosmic war, But beneath the scale of it, it has the texture of a dynastic conflict, relatives calculating what kind of future they can live with. This matters because the Titans are often flattened into villains. In modern imagination, Titan can sound like a synonym for monster. Huge, brutal, doomed, somehow less divine than the Olympians who replaced them. But in Greek tradition, the Titans are not simply monsters. They are gods of an older generation. They are woven into the same family that produces Zeus, Hera, Poseidon, Hades, Demeter, and Hestia. They are not outsiders attacking creation. They are creation's earlier rulers, ancestors, and powers. That makes the war a family fracture, not an invasion. And family fractures are rarely morally tidy. Take Themis, for example. She is a Titaness associated with divine order, law, custom, and counsel. She does not fit comfortably into the image of a defeated, rebellious enemy. In later mythic tradition, she is closely connected with Zeus, even appearing as a consort and counselor. That does not mean every detail can be pulled backward into the battlefield with perfect confidence, but it does warn us against imagining all Titans as a single hostile mass. Themis shows that old and lawless are not the same thing. In fact, this is one of the central tensions in the Titanomachy. Zeus claims to establish order, yet some forms of order already belong to older divine powers. The new regime cannot simply erase the old world. It must absorb parts of it. It must marry into it, listen to it, borrow from it, and reframe it as part of Olympian legitimacy. That is politics, even when the actors are immortal. A successful revolution does not only defeat its enemies, it decides which pieces of the previous order are too useful, too sacred, or too deeply rooted to destroy. Zeus does not build Olympus from nothing. He builds it from survivors, allies, inherited powers, and former dangers reclassified as foundations. Prometheus complicates the picture even further. He is a Titan, or at least part of the Titan lineage, yet he is not remembered simply as one of Zeus's defeated enemies in the war. In some traditions, Prometheus is aligned with Zeus against the Titans, or at least not grouped with the doomed defenders of Cronus in any straightforward way. Later, of course, Prometheus becomes one of Zeus's great challengers in another context, especially through the story of fire and the suffering that follows. But that later conflict should not blind us to the more complicated role he can play in the succession story. Prometheus is a useful reminder that loyalty in myth is not always permanent. A figure can support Zeus against Cronus and later resist Zeus himself. That is not inconsistency in the shallow sense. It reflects a deeper truth. Opposing one tyranny does not require eternal obedience to the power that replaces it. Prometheus, in that broader mythic imagination, becomes a problem for any regime that assumes gratitude should become silence. There is something sharp in that. The Olympian order benefits from figures who do not fully belong to it. Themis lends an older authority of law and counsel. Prometheus represents foresight, cunning, and a kind of uneasy moral intelligence that cannot be comfortably chained to one side forever. These figures show that the war is not only about strength, it is also about interpretation. Who understands the direction of events? Who sees that Cronus's rule cannot last? Who recognizes that Zeus is not merely another rebellious son, but the likely center of the next cosmic arrangement? The name Prometheus itself is often associated with forethought. Whether we lean heavily on that meaning or treat it cautiously, the symbolic fit is hard to miss. A war over succession would naturally attract beings who can read the future better than others. In a conflict between a ruler trying to prevent prophecy and a son trying to fulfill it, foresight is not decorative, it is strategic. If Cronus represents fear of the future, Prometheus represents the dangerous act of thinking ahead. And yet, foresight does not make someone safe. That is another lesson the myth preserves. Those who help a new order come into being may later become inconvenient to it. The same intelligence that recognizes Cronus's failure can also recognize Zeus's limits. The same power that helps history move forward may refuse to stop asking questions once the new throne is occupied. This is why the morally ambiguous figures in the Titanomachy are so important. They prevent the story from becoming propaganda too easily. The Olympians may be the necessary winners, but they are not the only bearers of wisdom. The Titans may be the defeated generation, but they are not all equally guilty or equally opposed to Zeus. Some older powers must be punished. Some must be integrated. Some remain uncomfortably free in the imagination, neither fully loyal nor fully damned. The war, then, is not a simple purge of the past. It is a sorting of the past. Cronus and the Titans who stand with him represent the old order's refusal to yield. Atlas will become a visible symbol of punishment. Others are sealed away. But figures like Themis and Prometheus suggest that Zeus's victory depends on more than crushing an enemy army. It depends on building a coalition strong enough to make the new order seem not merely victorious, but rightful. Rightfulness is not the same as victory. Victory can be achieved by force. Rightfulness requires a story that others can inhabit. Zeus needs thunder, yes. He needs the hundred-handed ones hurling overwhelming violence. But he also needs older legitimacy, counsel, prophecy, and the appearance that his rule is not merely another seizure of power. That is where the fractured loyalties of the Titans become essential. If every Titan opposed Zeus, his victory would look like generational annihilation. But if some older divine powers align with him, advise him, or survive within his order, then Olympus can present itself as continuity as well as rupture. It can say, the old world was not destroyed entirely, it was corrected. Its lawful elements remain. Its violent excess has been confined. Whether we trust that claim is another question. The myth invites us to see both sides of it. On one hand, Zeus's regime does appear more stable than Cronus's devouring kingship. It distributes power, honors allies, and establishes recognizable divine domains. On the other hand, it also writes the official meaning of the war after winning it. The line between correction and conquest is much clearer from the throne than from the prison below. This is why we should pay attention to those who do not fit. Themis, Prometheus, and other complicated divine figures are not distractions from the Titanomachy. They are cracks in the simplified version. Through them, we glimpse a war of negotiations, exceptions, and uneasy accommodations. Not every old power had to be buried. Not every ally of Zeus would remain obedient forever. Not every survivor of the previous age could be turned into a villain without losing something important. The old world did not fall as one body. It splintered. And Zeus's genius, if we can call it that, was not merely that he struck harder than Cronus. It was that he understood how to gather the right fragments. The swallowed siblings, the freed prisoners, the older powers willing to stand apart from Cronus, the dangerous intelligences that could see where the future was moving. The Titanomachy was fought with thunder and stone, but it was also fought with alignment. And before the final storm breaks, The battlefield is already telling us something the later victory songs might prefer to soften. Olympus was not born from purity. It was born from a coalition of the wounded, the ambitious, the imprisoned, the prophetic, the resentful, and the wise, all gathered for a time against a father who had mistaken possession for rule. When the final battle comes, it does not feel like a duel. That is important. The Titanomachy is sometimes imagined as though Zeus and Cronus stand alone at the center of the universe, father and son facing each other in a clean, symbolic confrontation. It is a tempting image because it gives the story a simple shape. One old king, one young challenger, one decisive blow. But Hesiod's imagination is larger and less tidy. The war ends as a cosmic convulsion. The earth shakes, the sea roars, the sky groans under fire and thunder. The line between battlefield and universe begins to disappear, because in this myth, the combatants are not merely fighting inside creation. They are the powers by which creation is understood. When they strike one another, the world itself responds. That is what gives the climactic battle its terror. It is not only that gods are fighting, it is that reality seems to be coming loose around them. Zeus now enters the conflict, transformed by alliance. He is no longer only the hidden child or the liberator of his siblings. He is armed with thunder. The Cyclopes have given him the weapon that turns the sky into a voice. The 100-handed ones have been freed from the depths, and their overwhelming strength changes the nature of the war. The stalemate that held for 10 years begins to break under powers that Cronus's order had once buried and ignored. There is a kind of historical irony in that, if myth can be allowed such a phrase. The old world is not defeated by something outside its story. It is defeated by everything it tried to suppress. The swallowed children return. The imprisoned beings rise. The older powers who will not stand with Cronus fracture his claim to represent the whole past. The final storm is not simply Zeus's personal triumph. It is an uprising of consequences. Hesiod's imagery makes this feel almost physical. Thunder and lightning do not decorate the scene. They saturate it. Fire seems to spread through the divine air. The ground trembles under the force of the combat. The 100-handed ones hurl enormous stones with relentless force, overwhelming the Titans not through graceful combat, but through a terrifying abundance of arms, strength, and impact. The war becomes too much sound, too much heat, too much motion, too much force for the older order to absorb. And that excess matters because the Titans had helped define the world before Zeus's order. They are not minor enemies waiting to be removed. For them to fall, the myth has to imagine a level of violence almost equal to creation itself. A polite transition would not be believable. Cronus's reign began in mutilation and continued in devouring. A world formed through that kind of fear cannot be reformed with ceremony alone. It must be broken open. Still, we should be careful not to invent a detailed battle plan where the surviving ancient poetry gives us something more elemental. Hesiod does not offer a modern military sequence with named charges, tactical formations, and individual heroic kills arranged for spectacle. The force of the scene lies in scale, not choreography. The climax is not a neat action scene. It is a storm of divine pressure where the universe becomes the witness and the medium of regime change. That restraint actually makes the battle more powerful, because the Titanomachy is not remembered through the intimate psychology of every fighter. It is remembered as an event so vast that ordinary detail burns away. What remains is thunder, stone, fire, shaking earth, and the sense that a previous age is being forced out of the visible world. The 100-handed ones are especially important in this final movement. Their release was already a moral turning point, but here their bodies become the mechanism of decision. The old order had locked them away because they were excessive, monstrous, unassimilable. Zeus wins by letting that excess loose against the defenders of the old order. Again, the myth does not give us a clean comfort. The liberation of the buried produces victory, but victory arrives through devastation. The beings freed from darkness do not resolve the conflict with gentle wisdom. They hurl massive stones until the Titans are overwhelmed. The old prison opens, and the result is not peace first, it is force redirected. That feels honest in a way myths often are. They do not always pretend that the end of oppression is serene. Sometimes the things buried by fear come back with a violence shaped by their burial. Sometimes a world that refused release for too long can only change through rupture. Zeus's thunderbolt works differently, but toward the same end. It makes his authority unmistakable. The hidden sun is now impossible to hide from. The child Cronus failed to swallow has become the god whose weapon crosses the sky in an instant. The private deception of the swaddled stone has matured into public force. There is a grim symmetry there. Cronus once mistook a stone for Zeus. Now stones and thunder together help bring down Cronus's world. But the point is not clever revenge. The point is reversal. Everything Cronus tried to control has moved beyond him. The future is outside him. The buried are above ground. The sky itself, once the symbol of the first tyrant Uranus, now answers to the son of the son who overthrew him. The chain of succession tightens, and then it snaps. The Titans are overwhelmed. The older generation that stood with Cronus cannot withstand the combined force of Zeus, the Olympians, the Cyclopes' gifts, and the 100-handed ones. The long stalemate ends not with compromise, but with collapse. Othrys loses its claim to define the cosmos. Olympus, still not yet peaceful, becomes the mountain of the winning future. But victory in Greek myth is rarely allowed to remain only bright. The storm that breaks the old world also reveals the cost of founding a new one. Zeus does not inherit an untouched universe. He inherits a battlefield. His kingship is born from the sound of the earth shaking under divine war. Whatever order follows will have to explain why this violence was necessary, why these enemies had to be buried, why this throne is not just another version of the throne before it. That question does not vanish when the Titans fall. It becomes more urgent. Because the old king was a tyrant, yes. Cronus swallowed his children. His rule made the future impossible. Yet the defeat of tyranny does not automatically prove the innocence of the victor. It only creates the opportunity for a different order. Whether that order becomes justice or merely better managed domination depends on what happens after the battle. And after the battle, the winners must decide what to do with the defeated. This is where the Titanomachy darkens again. The climax is not the end of violence. It is the moment violence changes form. During the war, force is open, blazing, audible. After the war, force becomes architecture. Chains, gates, depths. A prison far below the world. The storm clears, but not into forgiveness. It clears into judgment. That is why the final battle should not be treated as a simple celebration. It is spectacular, yes. It is the great thunderous birth of Olympian supremacy, but it also marks the moment when rebellion becomes authority, and authority must decide how much of the old terror it is willing to use in the name of order. Zeus has freed prisoners. Now he will make prisoners. The mountain before the gods has been won. The old world has broken under thunder, stone, and the uprising of what it buried. Olympus is closer than ever to becoming sacred. But beneath that coming brightness, Tartarus is waiting. After the storm, the myth does not offer mercy. The Titans fall, and the new order faces the problem every victorious power eventually faces: what to do with those who once ruled. Killing them, if we can even speak that way about divine beings, is not the solution the story chooses. The defeated Titans are not simply erased. They are imprisoned. They are sent down into Tartarus, the deep place beneath the world, a region so far below that it feels less like a location than a sentence. This matters because imprisonment has been with the story from the beginning. Uranus imprisoned his children. Cronus swallowed his. Zeus won the war partly by freeing the beings earlier rulers had confined. And now, after victory, Zeus's order seals its enemies away. The cycle has not disappeared. It has changed hands. Tartarus is not just a dungeon with mythological decoration. In the Greek imagination, it is the lowest depth, beneath even the ordinary realm of the dead, a place of cosmic distance and severity. To be placed there is not merely to be punished. It is to be removed from the visible order of the world. The defeated Titans become a buried foundation beneath Olympian brightness. That image should make us pause. Olympus rises. Tartarus receives. The new divine world is built through a vertical arrangement. Honored powers above, mortal life in the middle, defeated powers below. Order is created not by making every force peaceful, but by assigning each force a place. And for the Titans who fought with Cronus, that place is darkness, distance, and containment. In Hesiod's account, the 100-handed ones, once imprisoned themselves, become guardians over the defeated Titans. There is a grim symmetry here. Beings who were buried by the old regime are now entrusted with keeping the old regime buried. Their liberation does not lead them outside the logic of imprisonment entirely. It changes their position within it. Former prisoners become wardens. That may be one of the most uncomfortable reversals in the whole myth. From one angle, it is justice. The Titans who supported Cronus's order are confined by those whom earlier cosmic rulers had wronged. The buried powers are no longer helpless. They stand on the side of Zeus, honored and armed with purpose. The old tyrannies are answered. But from another angle, the image is darker. The new order still requires a prison at the base of the cosmos. The question is not whether confinement will exist, but who will control it, and which story will justify it. Greek myth does not resolve that tension neatly. It lets Tartarus remain, and Tartarus is important because it prevents the Olympian victory from becoming too clean. If the story ended with Zeus enthroned and the Titans simply gone, we might imagine the past had been fully overcome. But the Titans are not gone. They are below. They remain part of the structure of reality, not as active rulers, but as contained memory. Every golden order in this myth has a basement, The imprisonment also changes the meaning of Zeus's kingship. He is not only the god who frees, he is also the god who confines. He is not only the child who escaped a devouring father. He becomes the ruler who decides which powers must never again see the upper world. That does not make him identical to Uranus or Cronus, but it does keep the comparison alive. The difference lies in justification. Uranus imprisoned his children because he feared them. Cronus swallowed his children because prophecy terrified him. Zeus imprisons the Titans after a war, as defeated enemies whose continued freedom would threaten the cosmic order he is trying to establish. The myth presents this as punishment, perhaps even necessity. Yet necessity is one of power's favorite words, and Greek myth is wise enough to let us feel its weight without asking us to stop thinking. Was Tartarus justice? Was it vengeance? Was it political security? The most honest answer is that it is all three, depending on where we stand. From Olympus, Tartarus is the price of order. From the Titan's side, it is the victor's prison. From the perspective of the mythic pattern, it is the old wound repeating in a new legal language. That is why the defeat of the Titans is not simply an ending. It is a transformation of violence. Open war gives way to architecture. Chains replace thunder. The convulsion of battle settles into a permanent arrangement of above and below. The cosmos becomes stable because the defeated are held out of sight. And yet the myth seems to know that what is out of sight is not always gone from meaning. Tartarus remains a named place. The Titans remain remembered. Their punishment is part of the story people continue to tell. If Olympus is the visible triumph of Zeus, Tartarus is the hidden footnote beneath every claim that the new order is natural. There is a kind of warning in that. Victors often want the past to become silent, but myths preserve what official order tries to bury. They keep the old names alive. Cronus, Iapetus, Coeus, Creus, Hyperion. The defeated do not simply dissolve. Their memory continues, sometimes dimly, sometimes powerfully, in genealogies, in later tales, in the strange dignity of beings who lost the war, but still belong to the beginning of things. That continued memory complicates the triumph. The Olympians rule, but they do not erase ancestry. Zeus may sit above, but the world beneath him still contains the older generation. The new cosmos is therefore not a clean replacement. It is a layered reality. Victory above, punishment below, inheritance running through both. The 100-handed ones guarding Tartarus make that layering visible. Their presence says the new order has learned from the old one. It will not leave dangerous powers unguarded. It will not repeat Cronus's error of keeping enemies too close. It will place them at the greatest imaginable distance and set monstrous strength at the gates. But it also says something else. The new order does not trust peace alone. It trusts containment. That is the shadow beneath Zeus's victory. He may have broken Cronus's devouring rule. He may have released the buried allies who made victory possible. He may have ended the 10-year stalemate and established the conditions for a more organized cosmos. But the final proof of his authority is not a song, a feast, or a law. It is a prison. Tartarus becomes the deep signature of Olympian power, not seen from the bright mountain, but necessary to it. The Titans are below, so the gods above can appear secure. Their chains are part of the architecture of divine peace. And perhaps that is why the Titanomachy still feels darker than a simple myth of triumph. Because when the war ends, the question does not end with it. Has Zeus broken the cycle of tyranny, or has he given it boundaries, guards, and a better explanation? The myth does not answer in modern moral language. It gives us a mountain. It gives us a prison. And it leaves us to notice that the distance between them is the shape of the new world. Not every punishment is hidden. Some punishments are made visible on purpose. After the Titans are defeated, many of the old powers are sealed in Tartarus, pushed so far beneath the world that their imprisonment becomes almost architectural, part of the deep structure that holds the new order in place. But Atlas is different. He remains in the imagination not as a buried prisoner, but as a living monument, condemned, in many later accounts, to bear the sky. The image is famous enough that it has almost detached itself from the war that produced it. Atlas becomes a figure on maps, statues, book covers, and old emblems of endurance, a vast being bent beneath celestial weight. Modern memory often turns him into a symbol of strength, even duty. But in the mythic context, this is not a job. It is a sentence. Atlas survives the losing side, and survival does not spare him. It gives punishment time to continue. That is what makes his fate so powerful. Tartarus removes the defeated Titans from sight. Atlas is the opposite. He is displayed. His suffering is not locked away in the lowest darkness. It is placed at the edge of the world, where the separation between sky and earth becomes something a body must maintain. There is a political intelligence in that kind of punishment. A hidden prison secures the regime. A visible punishment teaches it. Atlas shows what happens when a power from the old order remains above the surface, but outside legitimacy. He is not allowed to rule. He is not allowed to vanish. He is made useful in defeat, forced to support the very cosmos whose new arrangement excludes him. That is harsher than simple destruction. To destroy an enemy ends the relationship. To punish him forever keeps him inside the story as a warning. Atlas becomes one of those mythic figures whose body carries a message larger than his biography. The old generation may have been overcome, but it still bears weight. The defeated past does not disappear. It holds up part of the world in pain. We should be cautious about flattening Atlas into a single version. His role grows and shifts across Greek and later traditions. The familiar image of him holding up the heavens becomes central, while later art and popular memory sometimes confuse or simplify the burden into the globe of the earth. But the older symbolic force remains. Atlas is connected with a cosmic weight imposed as punishment after the struggle against Zeus's order. And the burden matters because it reverses the first tyranny. In the beginning, Uranus, the sky, pressed down upon Gaia, the earth, trapping the future between them. Now, after the war, Atlas is forced to hold the sky apart. The old suffocating closeness of sky and earth has become a maintained separation. What was once a condition of oppression is now transformed into a task assigned to the defeated. That symmetry is almost too elegant to be accidental. The myth seems to remember that the cosmos needed space. Children needed room to emerge. Generations needed distance from the fathers who tried to contain them. Atlas's punishment makes that distance permanent, but it also makes it painful. The world's order depends on a body under strain. This is where the brightness of Zeus's victory darkens again. The new cosmos requires supports. Some are honored, The Cyclopes, the hundred-handed ones, the Olympian siblings, the older powers who align with Zeus. Others are coerced. Atlas is not a partner in the new order. He is an enforced pillar. The regime that freed some buried beings now uses a defeated Titan as living infrastructure. That does not mean Cronus's side becomes innocent in retrospect. The Titans who fought for the old order were defending a regime rooted in fear, devouring, and the refusal of succession. But Atlas reminds us that justice after victory can become theatrical. Punishment can be designed not only to secure peace, but to narrate power. Zeus does not merely win. He makes the defeat visible. And visibility has its own force. A condemned figure, at the edge of the world, says to any remaining challenger, "This is what endurance looks like when it belongs to the wrong side. Not death, not release. Continuation without freedom." Atlas also carries a strange dignity because he does not disappear into villainy. He is punished, but he is not ridiculous. He is defeated, but not small. The very scale of his burden gives him grandeur. That is one reason later imagination found him so compelling. A figure forced to hold the sky cannot be treated as merely disposable. His suffering becomes cosmic labor, and cosmic labor has a way of turning punishment into tragic stature. There is something uncomfortable in admiring him. We are admiring a sentence. We are seeing beauty in the form of a punishment that does not end. Myth often does this. It gives suffering an image so strong that later generations remember the image more than the injustice or necessity behind it. Atlas becomes endurance itself, and the politics of his condemnation blur around the edges. But in the Titanomachy, he belongs to the aftermath. He is what remains when thunder stops. That is important because wars do not end only with winners crowned and losers imprisoned. They leave symbols behind. They create monuments, warnings, altered landscapes, strange exceptions. Atlas is one of those exceptions. He shows that the defeat of the Titans was not a single action, but a reorganization of every possible place the old powers could occupy. Some below, some integrated, some honored, some watched, and one, at least in the most enduring image, bearing the sky. His punishment also exposes the difference between order and peace. Order can be stable while still being cruel. Peace can rest on pressure. The sky stays up. The world continues. Olympus gleams. But somewhere at the edge of that arrangement is a being whose endless strain makes the calm possible. This is why Atlas is such a useful figure for understanding the darker underside of Olympian rule. He is not the center of the war, but he is one of its clearest consequences. He turns victory into posture. He gives the new universe an image of cost. And perhaps that is why he survives so powerfully in memory. The Titans sealed in Tartarus are hidden. Cronus becomes a defeated father, a former king in the deep. But Atlas remains imaginable because he occupies a boundary. He stands between earth and sky, between punishment and necessity, between rebellion and service, between the old order's defeat and the new order's dependence on what it has defeated. A buried enemy can be forgotten. A burdened enemy becomes a landmark. So when we picture Atlas beneath the heavens, we should not see only strength. We should see the aftermath of succession, We should see a divine war refusing to end cleanly. We should see how the new order turns a surviving opponent into part of its machinery. The Titanomachy leaves many things in darkness. Atlas is what it leaves in plain sight. Victory is not the same as rule. The storm can break the old world. Thunder can drive the Titans into defeat. Tartarus can swallow the losing generation. Atlas can be fixed beneath the weight of the sky. But after all of that, something quieter and more difficult remains. The winners must build a cosmos that can last. This is where Zeus changes from rebel to ruler. During the war, his purpose is clear. He is the hidden child who escaped Cronus, the liberator of his siblings, the commander who frees the buried powers and turns stalemate into victory. But after the war, the question becomes more dangerous because it is less dramatic. What kind of order will he create now that no father stands above him? A rebellion can define itself by what it opposes. A kingdom cannot. The new Olympian order must decide where power belongs. In later epic tradition, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades divide the great regions of the cosmos by lot. Zeus receives the sky, Poseidon the sea, and Hades the realm of the dead, while the earth and Olympus remain in a more shared or common relation, depending on the telling. The details belong especially to later poetic tradition, rather than the core battle narrative alone. But the idea is crucial. The sons of Cronus do not simply replace their father with another single, devouring center. They distribute the world. That distribution is the strongest argument that Zeus has changed something fundamental. Cronus held the future inside himself. Zeus, by contrast, presides over a cosmos divided into domains. His brothers are not swallowed, hidden, or denied existence. They become powers with territories of their own. Poseidon does not disappear into Zeus. Hades does not vanish into Zeus. They stand as formidable rulers in their own right, even if Zeus remains supreme among them. This is not equality in a modern sense. Olympus is not a democracy. Zeus is not a constitutional monarch gently consulting a parliament of gods. His authority remains immense. And later myths repeatedly show how tense, coercive, and unstable that authority can be. But compared with Cronus's politics of consumption, the new arrangement is more spacious. It allows divine power to occupy different regions, instead of being trapped inside one terrified ruler. The cosmos can breathe, at least above the prisons. That qualification matters. Zeus's order is broader than Cronus's order, but it is not innocent. Its stability depends on Tartarus. It depends on Atlas. It depends on the memory of thunder as much as the promise of law. The Olympian system is not a peaceful garden planted after violence has vanished. It is an administration built over sealed consequences, and perhaps that is why Olympus becomes such a powerful symbol. It is not only a mountaintop. It is the visible face of successful rule. Feasting gods, shining halls, councils, marriages, rivalries, and judgments. All of these later images help make divine power feel settled. Olympus presents order as altitude. The gods look down because the war has placed them above. But the height is not natural in the way it later appears. It was won. That is the secret history beneath the bright mountain. Olympus becomes sacred, not because it was always uncontested, but because the contest ended with Zeus's side in possession of the summit. The throne of the gods is a victory site with better lighting. This does not make the Olympian order false. Myths are not false simply because they remember violence. In fact, they often become more truthful when they refuse to hide it. The Titanomachy explains why Zeus rules, but it also preserves the troubling cost of his legitimacy. He rules because Cronus made rule unbearable. He rules because he freed those who helped him. He rules because he won. He rules because the defeated were locked away. All of these reasons stand together. None cancels the others. That complexity is what separates myth from propaganda at its best. Pure propaganda would tell us Zeus was always the rightful king. The Titans were always monsters. And the new order arrived like sunrise after a bad dream. The surviving story is more interesting. It gives Zeus a strong claim, but not an unstained one. It allows us to see why his victory was necessary while still noticing how closely justice walks beside force. The division of the cosmos also raises the old question in a new form. Has Zeus broken the cycle of tyranny, or merely mastered it? The answer depends on which pattern we follow. If the pattern is fathers devouring children to prevent succession, Zeus has interrupted it. He does not swallow his brothers. He does not keep all power inside himself. He creates a hierarchy with room for other gods to act, rebel, negotiate, and possess spheres of influence. That is a real change. But if the pattern is rulers securing order through imprisonment, Zeus continues it. The Titans are in Tartarus. Threats to cosmic stability are placed below, guarded, punished, and remembered as dangers that justify the arrangement above. That too is real. Greek myth gives us no clean escape from power. It gives us better and worse forms of rule, not a world without domination. Zeus is better than Cronus in the succession story because he allows the future to exist beyond his own body. Yet he remains a king born from war, and kings born from war rarely forget the usefulness of force. This is why the Olympian order feels both luminous and uneasy. It offers structure after terror. It gives the gods names, seats, honors, and domains. It turns the chaos of generational violence into a recognizable universe. But beneath that order lies the knowledge that it had to be imposed. The defeated ancestors are still somewhere below the story. Their absence is part of the piece. For mortals listening to these myths, that may have felt familiar. Human cities also build order after conflict. Families also pass down wounds as laws. New rulers also claim to end old abuses while preserving some of the old instruments. The gods, in this sense, are not above politics. They magnify it until it becomes cosmic. Zeus's new world is therefore not the end of the question. It is the beginning of a more sophisticated one. Not who won the war. We know who won. The deeper question is what victory allowed the winners to call justice. From Olympus, the answer seems clear. The tyrant has fallen. The children have been freed. The cosmos has been divided and governed. Thunder now defends order instead of merely announcing rebellion. But from below, from Tartarus, from the edge where Atlas strains, from the memory of older gods who did not all deserve the same fate, the answer is less comfortable. The war ends. Interpretation does not. And so Zeus sits at the center of a world that is more stable than the one before it, but not free from the violence that made stability possible. Olympus shines because the old storm has passed. Yet its brightness depends on a truth the myths never entirely conceal. Every divine throne is also a reminder of the body that fell before it. So what really happened during the War of the Titans? The honest answer is not a battlefield report. There is no ancient file of divine casualties, no recovered map of troop movements between Olympus and Othrys, no eyewitness account written while thunder was still burning across the sky. The Titanomachy belongs to myth, and myth does not preserve truth in the same way an archive tries to preserve fact. But that does not mean it preserves nothing. The war tells us what the Greeks, or at least the poets and traditions we can still hear, found disturbing about power. It tells us that order is never as innocent as it looks from the throne. It tells us that every ruling generation wants to seem eternal, and every threatened ruler eventually discovers that the future is not easily murdered. If we ask what really happened, in the strict historical sense, the evidence cannot take us there. We are dealing with divine genealogy, sacred poetry, later interpretation, and fragments of traditions that once lived more fully than they do now. The Titanomachy is not a memory of armies in the human world. It is a cosmic drama about succession. But if we ask what the story is really about, the answer becomes sharper. It is about legitimacy after violence. Uranus rules first by suppression. Cronus overthrows him and then repeats the same logic in a more intimate form. Zeus survives because that logic fails. He frees his siblings, releases older prisoners, gathers fractured loyalties, and wins a war that allows him to define the next age of the universe. That is the skeleton of the myth. But the flesh of it is stranger. The Titanomachy is not simply the story of good young gods defeating evil old gods. That version is comforting because it lets us imagine history as a staircase. Each generation rises, improves, corrects, and leaves darkness behind. Greek myth is more suspicious than that. It lets Zeus be necessary without making him harmless. It lets Cronus be monstrous without forgetting that he once acted against a tyrant. It lets the Titans be defeated without turning all of them into meaningless villains. The result is not a clean moral fable. It is a study of how power justifies itself after it wins. Cronus can say he feared prophecy. Uranus might have said he feared disorder. Zeus can say he punished rebellion and secured the cosmos. Each ruler has a language for his violence. What changes is whether that language convinces the world after the fact. And Zeus's language proves stronger. He does not merely defeat Cronus. He creates a reality in which Cronus's defeat makes sense. The swallowed children become evidence. The freed prisoners become allies. The thunderbolt becomes authority. Tartarus becomes justice. Olympus becomes order. That is how victory becomes legitimacy, not by force alone, but by interpretation. The war also reveals a pattern that ancient audiences would have recognized in human life, even if the scale is divine. Families are political. Inheritance is dangerous. A father's fear can become a child's destiny. A ruler who prevents succession may create the very rebellion he dreads. And when the new generation finally wins, it must decide whether it has truly escaped the old violence or merely learned to speak of it more beautifully. This is why the Titanomachy still feels alive. It is not because we believe, in a literal sense, that the gods once hurled mountains across the sky. It is because the emotional machinery of the myth remains recognizable. We have seen institutions devour their successors. We have seen rulers call fear prudence. We have seen revolutions inherit the prisons of the regimes they replaced. We have seen bright new orders stand above buried costs. The ancient story gives those patterns divine names. Cronus is not only an old god, he is the terror of being replaced. Zeus is not only a storm god, he is the future that survives long enough to become authority. Tartarus is not only a mythic depth, it is what every order must hide, guard, and explain. So what really happened? A myth happened, and that is not a small thing. A myth is not a lie wearing old clothes. At its best, it is a structure for thinking about truths too large, too recurring, or too morally tangled to fit inside ordinary explanation. The Titanomachy takes the problem of succession and enlarges it until the whole cosmos trembles. It asks what must be buried for a world to appear stable. It asks whether justice can be born through violence without carrying violence inside it. It asks whether the child who defeats the tyrant can avoid becoming another ruler who fears what comes next. The answer, as always in Greek myth, is uneasy. Zeus changes the cosmos. He does not purify it. He breaks Cronus's devouring rule. He does not abolish divine hierarchy. He frees some prisoners. He imprisons others. He distributes power, but remains supreme. He creates a more spacious world, but one still secured by punishment. That may be the closest thing the myth offers to realism. Not realism of events, but realism of power. The Titanomachy remembers regime change without pretending regime change is clean. It gives us a world where rebellion can be justified, victory can be necessary, and the aftermath can still be morally shadowed. It refuses to let us rest in a single answer. Perhaps that is why the war survives in fragments. A complete version might tempt us to treat it like a settled case. The fragments keep it open. They force us to reconstruct not only what the myth says, but what it means to remember a universe founded by overthrow. And when we do that, Olympus looks different. It is no longer just the home of the gods. It is the winning side of a family catastrophe, raised high enough to seem eternal. After the war, Olympus becomes bright. That is how the later imagination prefers it. High air, shining halls, immortal feasts, gods looking down over the weather of mortal life. Zeus sits enthroned. The great division of the cosmos has taken shape. The old devouring king is gone. The swallowed children have become rulers. The storm has passed into law. But the mountain is not innocent. It never was. Olympus stands above a story of fathers fearing children, mothers hiding futures, prisoners rising from beneath creation, and defeated ancestors sealed in the dark. The new order may be more spacious than the old one. It may even be necessary. But it is built over everything it had to conquer, punish, absorb, or silence. That is the secret the Titanomachy leaves beneath the marble. Greek myth does not ask us to believe that peace arrives because violence disappears. More often, peace arrives because violence has been organized. Given boundaries, given guards, given a sacred explanation. Tartarus remains below. Atlas still bears his burden in the later imagination. The Titans do not rule. but they are not nothing. They are the buried memory of a world before Zeus could call himself king. And this is why the War of the Titans still matters. Not because it gives us a simple origin story for the Olympians, not because it lets us cheer for one divine team over another. It matters because it understands something difficult. Every golden age begins by deciding what must be locked away. For Cronus, the future had to be locked away. For Zeus, the defeated past had to be locked away. The difference is real. Cronus tried to prevent life from becoming itself. Zeus punished powers that had fought to preserve a devouring regime. But the echo remains. The shape repeats. A ruler rises, claims order, and places danger in the dark. Perhaps that is the most honest ending the myth can offer. Zeus does not become Cronus, but he does not become free from Cronus either. He inherits the wound and governs it more successfully. He turns private terror into public order. He breaks the father's body prison and replaces it with cosmic architecture. Olympus is not the end of the cycle, so much as the moment the cycle becomes stable enough to look divine. And maybe that is why the Greeks kept telling these stories with such strange unease. Their gods were not pure symbols of goodness. They were powers. Beautiful, dangerous, necessary, contradictory powers. They could create order without being morally simple. They could defeat tyranny while preserving punishment. They could shine above the world while something older remained chained below it. So when we look back at Olympus, we should not see only a throne. We should see the mountain before the gods, a prize won after a family war, a summit raised over a prison, a bright court whose foundations descend into Tartarus. The Titanomachy ends with Zeus ruling the sky. But beneath that sky, the silence remains. And in Greek myth, silence is rarely empty. It is where the next buried story waits.